Yo, what the fuck is up, gamers? I have finally finished the Harry Potter book series, plus some spin-off books here as well. And I thought I'd give you guys another review today for the series. And the first book that we're going to be reviewing today is Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. This is by far the longest Harry Potter book. You can see even longer than these other final two ones. And it actually is even longer than it seems because the text that they use is printed much smaller than the rest of the series. So really it's the longest by a wide margin. I definitely enjoyed this book a little more than the previous books I had read, but still suffers from a lot of the same problems that I've discussed in the previous video. So in this book, we start out where the last book left off, where Voldemort is back, and Harry is living with the Dursleys, constantly fearing for what is going to happen, whether people are dying in the wizarding world. One of the themes in this book that's also present in the next two books as well is the media not being trustworthy, the mainstream media. The kind of mainstream news publication of the wizarding world is called the Daily Stormer, the Daily Prophet. In this book, the Daily Prophet are hardcore denying that Voldemort has come back. They don't want people to know that that's real, so they kind of published articles about how Voldemort is not really back and Harry and Dumbledore are lying. The book definitely illustrates how the media can manipulate people. Even some of Harry's own friends are starting to be kind of skeptical of him and think that Dumbledore is crazy. The film doesn't just criticize the mainstream media, they also criticize alternative media. There's an alternative newspaper called The Quibbler that's ran by one of the main characters' fathers. And The Quibbler publishes a lot of conspiracy theories that are just as misleading as the Daily Prophet. Stories about how the government officials are all secretly murderers that torture goblins. Theories about how there's all these mythical creatures that the government is hiding from you. The Quibbler's basically kind of the Joe Rogan podcast of the wizarding world, and I thought it was a pretty well done satire of our media. The Ministry of Magic, which is the main kind of governing body of the wizarding world, slowly starts to gain more control over Hogwarts. They're constantly trying to undermine Dumbledore's control over the school and institute their own rules and their own teachers and things like that. We get a new character, Professor Umbridge, who's their new dark arts professor, and she is just the most insufferable person ever. The Umbridge character is definitely kind of satirizing, the modern school system. She only cares about the students learning the textbook and learning theory as opposed to actually putting what they're learning into practice in an actual useful way. And the students can start to get very frustrated. They create their own secret club to practice magic. The film also continues the theme of, bigotry and racism. From the previous books, there's a character, Creature, in this book who's treated very poorly by Sirius and by pretty much everyone else. And the poor treatment of Creature actually ends up causing the death of Sirius in the end. So the character's bigotry kind of bites them in the ass. You start to see the characters slowly realize that their treatment of the house elves is wrong. The book briefly explores how the wizarding world has kind of tried to rewrite their own history and present it as if, wizards don't treat other groups poorly. They go into the main ministry building and there's statues of wizards and elves and centaurs and all these creatures living together as equals, peacefully, as if that's how the world is, when that really is not really how things are. The book also builds on this idea of a connection between Harry and Voldemort. They've kind of set this up since the first book, that Harry has kind of this connection where his scar will start to tingle and burn whenever he gets near Voldemort. And in this one, they kind of expand on it even more. He starts to have visions through Voldemort's eyes. He can see what's going on with Voldemort whenever Voldemort is having a strong emotional experience. Whenever Voldemort is very angry, Harry's scar will start to burn and he'll see through Voldemort's eyes, or when he's feeling very happy or whatever. And Dumbledore tells Harry that he shouldn't be seeing these things. He needs to close his mind off to Voldemort. But Harry doesn't want to listen, and it eventually results in Sirius's death because he starts to believe that these visions are real, and they realize at the end that actually some of these visions he's been seeing aren't actually what's happening. Voldemort kind of sends him a fake image in his mind that Sirius has captured, and Harry thinks it's real. I think this is the only book in this series that actually shows, character flaws in Harry. That Hermione kind of mentions that he has a boner for always wanting to be the hero, even when he's, going against what Dumbledore told him with closing his mind off to Sirius. He has to be the hero. He has to, go against everybody's judgment and do things on his own. And that results in Sirius's death. In pretty much every other book, Harry has no character flaws whatsoever. He's basically just the cookie cutter, good guy, perfect person. Makes Harry really just not relatable at all. The only reason Harry is relatable is just because he gets, bullied by his parents, bullied at school. That's really the only way they kind of make Harry relatable or a empathetic person. But other than that, he really is just like a Christ-like figure. He just is a perfect person who always makes the right decisions at all times. It makes it kind of hard to really be invested in him as a character. But this book, actually, he does have some flaws, which I enjoyed. And then, Sirius dies at the end. I personally didn't really feel like it was that impactful. I didn't care for Sirius as a character basically at all. They don't really make you invested in him as a character other than, Harry thinks of him as a dad. That's basically the only reason why you're supposed to care about Sirius. He's not really an enjoyable character at all. One of the things I was wondering is why didn't they just make a painting of Sirius? Because the paintings in the Wizarding World have, the properties of the real person. They have all the memories of the person and the personality of the person. So, couldn't they have just made a painting of Sirius? They don't really establish the rules of how the paintings work. Can anyone just make a painting of themselves and their personality is now encapsulated forever in that painting? It's kind of strange that the paintings are never really explained, and no one really asks these type of questions. You don't really even think of that at all when characters die. Another interesting plot bit that happens in this book is Harry kind of learns that his dad was a bully in high school and kind of, harassed Snape and bullied Snape. And Harry's kind of image of his father that he had in his head is kind of shattered. It kind of shows how we hold our personal heroes in our head to a very high standard and kind of create an idea of them in our head that isn't really representative of real life. I think it's definitely an important lesson for kids to learn. Overall, I think this is definitely probably the strongest book in the series. But it still I would say is a bit lackluster. I thought it dragged a little bit. It did not need to be this absurdly long. Found it a little boring, to be honest. A lot of parts where not much is really happening, but I enjoyed some of the new characters, some of the kind of satire elements of the book, the connection with Harry and Voldemort. A lot of solid stuff. So if you're a Potterhead, definitely read this one. Now moving on, we got Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. Probably the weakest one of the three that I'm going to review today. Professor Snape is definitely a big highlight of this book. The book kind of makes you go back and forth between, is Snape on Dumbledore's side? Is he on Voldemort's side? You're not really sure. He's kind of a double agent. He could be either or. And I thought it was pretty well done how they did that. Other thing I liked about this book is they delve into the backstory of Voldemort. Dumbledore takes it upon himself to teach Harry Voldemort's background, and they go into his memories and everything. I definitely found it pretty interesting to see how Voldemort, became the person he is today. He had a very troubled upbringing. One of the subplots in this book that I didn't really enjoy is the one that the book is named after, the Half-Blood Prince subplot. Harry gets this book from one of his teachers, Horace Slughorn. He lends him a used potions book, and the book has notes on it from someone called the HalfBlood Prince, and the notes have a lot of advice on how to make potions very well. A lot of the times the HalfBlood Prince actually corrects things in the book that aren't exactly correct, and shows you how to make the potion even better than it says in the book. So Harry starts to kind of perform really good in potions, and the big reveal at the end is, oh my gosh, Snape is the Half-Blood Prince. He's the one that's been helping you in potions this whole time. Wow. And it's meant to be this like big reveal at the end, and I just didn't care at all. I'm like, why is this significant at all? The big reveal is that Snape was good at potions, which we already knew. You know, he wrote a book with advice on how to do potions. I don't understand why this is really significant at all, and I don't know why we spend so much time on it. I'm assuming the reason it's supposed to be such a big reveal is because it's kind of a slap in the face to Harry, who very much hates Snape, and then finds out that Snape has been kind of helping him this whole year. But I still feel like it's too minor of a thing to make such a huge part of the book, you know, even naming the book after it. Yeah, I just didn't care about that at all, and I honestly think the book would be better if it was entirely cut out. Another thing I also liked is Draco Malfoy's character in this book. In the previous books, Draco is kind of this just cartoonishly evil, cunty, bullying a kid, and in this book they kind of give him a lot more character. You kind of see how when push comes to shove and he actually has to do some fucked up shit and kill Dumbledore, you know, he can't do it. He's still a child at heart. He's not as ruthless as he presents himself. A lot of it is a facade. You know, they kind of show deep down Draco still does have empathy for people. He still does have a moral, he still does have moral character, even though he kind of puts on this facade of being a, ruthless bully. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed that. And then the most significant plot point in here is, of course, Dumbledore dies at the end of the book, which I definitely think was a smart plot point to go with. Dumbledore kind of gives you the feeling that Harry never really is in much danger because, Dumbledore's always there, the most powerful wizard in the world who can stop Voldemort. Now, with Dumbledore out of the picture, the tension seems, way higher for the final book. So, yeah, I definitely liked that choice. And, yeah, overall, I'd say this book is kind of weak. I'm going to be real. Now we get to the grand finale, the grand conclusion of the Harry Potter franchise, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. The final book, the seventh book. And yeah, this one is a lot different from the previous books. There's very little actual time in Hogwarts because the Death Eaters have kind of taken over, and Harry and Hermione and Ron are, wanted and need to go into hiding. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed that kind of the switch up here, where it's very different from the rest of the books. One of my least favorite things that happens in this book happens right at the beginning. They try to give Dudley like a redemption arc at the beginning of the book, and it is just so stupid, so silly. He all of a sudden is like super likes Harry, and he's like, oh, because you saved my life that one time, I respect you now, Harry. And it's just so out of character and so stupid. I don't know why J.K. Rowling thought that was a good idea. So a majority of this book is them kind of searching to destroy these Horcruxes, which Horcruxes are a thing that they explain in this book, where Voldemort basically has split his soul into these various objects so that he can't really die. When he's killed, his soul will still be alive because of these Horcrux objects that they need to destroy if they want to kill Voldemort. So they search high and low for these things. They don't really know where any of them are. There's 4 remaining at the start of this book. I think the book drags a little bit. It didn't quite need to be as long as it is. They spend a lot of time kind of just lost in the woods, not really doing much. In this book, the connection between Harry and Voldemort gets a lot more intense, and there's a lot of scenes where Harry is like switching back and forth, and it was actually kind of interesting to read, kind of going back and forth between Harry and Voldemort, almost having Voldemort as a POV character at some points. I definitely enjoyed that. it kind of didn't really make much sense to me, the link between Harry and Voldemort. In this book, they kind of establish that, oh, we can't trust the things that you're seeing through Voldemort's eyes. At the end of this book, Voldemort tricks Harry into thinking that Sirius is dead. But in this book, they kind of just revert to assuming that everything Harry is seeing is real. And it is real. Harry doesn't actually see any illusions this time, which seems kind of weird. It almost is like J.K. Rowling forgot that Voldemort could do that. In this book, it seemed like Voldemort was starting to become aware that Harry could see, visions of him, and started to take advantage of that. But in this book, it almost seems like Voldemort has no idea that Harry is seeing anything, and he gives a lot away through these visions that Harry, wouldn't have otherwise known. So yeah, it seemed like these two books don't really fit together very well. I didn't really understand that. It was very frustrating how Harry finds the last Horcrux. It's because he inherits Voldemort's mind for a second, and Voldemort has a thought in his head, oh, I need to go to Hogwarts to get the last Horcrux or something. That's how Harry figures out where the Horcrux is, which is very kind of retarded. It's kind of strange because Harry becomes aware that the Horcrux is in Hogwarts, but he doesn't know exactly where the Horcrux is. If he was inheriting Voldemort's mind, how would he not be able to know that? If Voldemort is thinking about the Horcrux, how would he be able to think about it being in Hogwarts but not think about the location it is in Hogwarts? It doesn't really make much sense how the mind link works. The mind link seems to work however J.K. Rowling needs it to work for the plot to progress, which can be a bit frustrating. Another thing that frustrated me is they introduce a lot of new things that we didn't know about before, which is fine, but a lot of these new things that are introduced are important for them to be able to beat Voldemort. The ways that he actually beats Voldemort are because of these new items in the world that we were just finding out about now and had no idea they existed. We learn about how wands have kind of allegiances, and a wand will become subservient to a wizard if the wizard won that wand in combat. And another thing this book introduces is the Deathly Hallows, which are these 3 mythical items, one of which is the Elder Wand, which is an unbeatable wand that we're just finding out about now. And these 2 things, the Elder Wand and the fact that wands become allegiant to people that win them in combat, these 2 things that we're just finding out about now are the way that Harry Potter beats Voldemort. It just seems kind of lazy that for Harry to beat Voldemort, we have to pull 2 new things we had no idea about out of our ass to kind of bend the rules of how the wizarding world works such that Harry Potter is able to beat Voldemort. It feels very lazy. It feels like a Deus Ex Machina. Didn't like that at all. Another thing I thought kind of strange in this book is the way that they give Snape like a redemption arc. After Snape kills Dumbledore at the end of this one, Harry kind of hates Snape and thinks he's evil or whatever, thinks he's Hitler. And then as Snape dies, Dumbledore kills Snape so that he can gain control of the Elder Wand, which doesn't even end up happening. There's a whole convoluted explanation at the end as to why Voldemort doesn't actually have control of the wand or whatever. But anyway, he kills Snape to get control of the wand, and before Snape dies, he gives Harry all these memories from his life that basically kind of gives Snape this redemption arc that, he was actually a nice guy this whole time. Snape and Harry's mother were very close until Snape started associating with these Death Eaters and believing in this anti-Mudblood ideology. Snape became a follower of Voldemort, but when he found out that Voldemort was going to kill Lily Potter, he turned on Voldemort and became an agent for Snape and warned Snape that Voldemort was going to try to kill Lily and all this stuff. They try to give him a redemption arc, but it's not really a redemption arc. He's still very much an evil person. The only reason he turns on Voldemort is just because Voldemort's going to kill someone that he likes. It's not because he disagrees with Voldemort's ideology and doesn't believe in this anti-Mudblood nonsense. It's just because, now Dumbledore is going to hurt someone I like. So Snape really isn't redeemed much at all by this book, but in Harry's eyes, he is for some reason, and Harry goes from hating Snape and thinking he's Hitler to now thinking he's like a Christ-like figure and names his child after Snape. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. Yes, I don't understand why Harry would name his kid after Snape or even think that Snape is someone worth looking up to. I mean, he seems like a spineless piece of shit. But yeah, that was one of the dumbest points in here. I wasn't a very big fan of the conclusion. I think the way Voldemort dies at the end was kind of very stupid, very lazy. The only reason Voldemort even loses at the end is because of some convoluted explanation of how the Elder Wand works. You know, Voldemort thinks that you have to kill the person to get the wand allegiant to you, but really you just have to beat the person in combat to get allegiance of the wand. So yeah, it doesn't really make sense. It's a very convoluted explanation that's just pulled out of thin air. The Elder Wand is already pulled out of thin air, and this idea that wands can be allegiant to people is pulled out of thin air. And then, yeah. So it's just very kind of dumb how Voldemort loses. There were a few things at the end I liked. I liked Neville's character arc. You get to see him go from kind of a more cowardly character in the first book to kind of a more brave character in the final book. He definitely has a better arc than almost any character in the series. I also liked the kind of relationship between Ron and Hermione. They have a big moment where they kiss in the book, and it was done a lot better in the book than in the film. Hermione kisses him because Ron finally starts to recognize house elves as equal to wizards, which he has not done for the entire series. It's been a constant, theme throughout the series that no one takes Hermione seriously about, giving house elves equal rights or whatever. And Ron finally shows that he cares about Hermione and her beliefs in the book. And I thought it was a pretty sweet moment. The absolute worst part of this book is the final epilogue chapter. It is so stupid, and it's just one of the worst things I've ever read, where Harry is like 30-something years old now. He has kids. And it ends with them really trying to redeem the Slytherin house and give Slytherin a redemption arc. I already kind of mentioned how they try to redeem Snape, but yeah, his son is worried, what if I get into Slytherin, Dad? And Harry basically says, there's nothing wrong with being a Slytherin. One of the most respectable, brave people I ever met was a Slytherin, and you're named after him, Mr. Severus. It's just so dumb. I mean, not only just trying to redeem Snape, but trying to redeem the Slytherin house. I'm not buying this at all. Again, Salazar Slytherin's whole ideology is based around genociding mudbloods and cleansing them from Hogwarts. And pretty much every Slytherin we meet in the entire series believes in this ideology of thinking that mudbloods are inferior. So this idea that Slytherins are just chill and they're just like anybody else, I'm not buying it at all. J.K. Rowling did not set that up at all. We don't meet a single redeemable Slytherin character. It's just not earned at all. Trying to give the Slytherin house a redemption arc at the end. It is so stupid. And yeah, there were also some interesting bits of philosophy in here where the characters drop some wisdom. Hermione has an epic Reddit atheist moment in here where she's talking to Xenophilius Lovegood, who is Luna's father, and Xenophilius is explaining the story of the Deathly Hallows and how these 3 items from this old fairy tale actually are real in his opinion. And Hermione is quite skeptical. She says, quote, "All right," said Hermione, disconcerted. "Say the cloak existed. What about the stone, Mr. Lovegood? The thing you call the resurrection stone? What of it?" "Well, how can that be real?" "Prove that it is not," said Xenophilius. Hermione looked outraged. But that's completely ridiculous. How can I possibly prove it doesn't exist? Do you expect me to get hold of all the pebbles in the world and test them? I mean, you could claim that anything's real if the only basis for believing in it is that nobody's proved it doesn't exist. Yeah, these are some kind of interesting arguments that are actually used in like real life philosophy, and arguments about the existence of God or the existence of aliens or various different things. I think kids can kind of learn a lot from some of the philosophy explored in here. There's another section in here where Lee Jordan is hosting a radio show with Kingsley. Kingsley calls for the listeners to protect their Muggle neighbors from the Death Eaters. And Lee says, "And what would you say, Royal, to those listeners who reply that in these dangerous times it should be wizards first?" "I'd say that it's one short step from wizards first to purebloods first and then to Death Eaters," replied Kingsley. "We're all human, aren't we? Every human life is worth protecting and worth saving." Kind of illustrates the slippery slope of bigotry. This actually reminded me of arguments I've heard in real life regarding, white nationalism. During the kind of whole alt-right movement, one of the big proponents of a white ethno-state was this guy called Nick Fuentes, who is half Hispanic. A lot of Nick's critics argued, how do you know that once you create this white ethno-state that they're going to consider you not white because you're part Hispanic? It's a similar argument that is being used here. So I like some of the philosophical concepts that are explored in the book. But overall, the conclusion was pretty lackluster. And yeah, I really wouldn't recommend these books for anyone other than young children. But yeah, so I also got some spin-off books here that I want to talk about. First up, we have Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, the book that the new series of movies was based on. And this book is pretty dumb. I mean, it's really just like an ABC's book of just all these made-up creatures in the Harry Potter lore. And it just goes over every kind of mythical creature in the Harry Potter universe and explains what they are and what they can do. I really did not find it very interesting, to be honest. Yeah, I wouldn't really recommend reading this one. I could see maybe using this as a reference book when you're reading the main series, because there's a lot of different animals they reference. You might forget what animal is what, and you can check in here. But other than that, I don't really see any purpose to reading through this. There's some interesting stuff at the beginning about how they categorize creatures and what makes a beast different from a intelligent being or a wizard. That was a little bit interesting, but yeah, I wouldn't really recommend this book. These books are all actual in-universe books. So for the Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, it's supposed to be written by Newt Scamander, who's a zoologist kind of person in the Harry Potter universe. And Harry Potter actually, I believe, is assigned this book in the Philosopher's Stone. This is part of his curriculum. He has to read this book. I was looking at a PDF version of this online, and the original version of this book, they present it as if it's Harry's copy of the book. So it has little notes in it from Harry and Ron and kind of little things throughout the series that Harry writes in the book. And for some reason in this version, they cut all that out. All the notes are gone, which I feel like takes away a lot of the character of the original book. So I don't really know why they did that. Moving on, the next one we got Quidditch Through the Ages. This book goes over the history of Quidditch, the history of the teams. I personally did not find it very interesting at all. I barely remember really anything from this book except the fact that the golden snitch used to be a bird. It used to be the golden snidget, and it was an actual bird in the Harry Potter universe that they would catch. The snidgets started going endangered, so they created the golden snitch, which is a magical item that imitates kind of the actions of a snidget, which is why it kind of flies around and wisps around like it does in the series. There's a little snidget there on the back. I don't know if you can see that. But yeah, I really didn't find anything in here particularly interesting. It was a bit of a slog to get through. I think they go over like brooms, the history of broom flight and how that came to be. This is probably the worst of the three, I would say. And moving on, we got this one. This one I actually did enjoy, The Tales of Beedle the Bard. This is a book that is very important to the events of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. because this is the book that contains the story of the Deathly Hallows that Dumbledore gives to Hermione. And yeah, basically this book is just a collection of fairy tales in the Wizarding universe written by some character called Beedle, who's kind of like a Brothers Grimm type person that creates fairy tales. Through the fairy tales, you can kind of see, you know, the wizards' values and what they want to, you know, teach to their children, the morals and the lessons. And Dumbledore gives insights after each story, kind of going over the history of each story. And there's a lot of stories in here where they're controversial because they're pro, you know, muggles and mudbloods and things like that. So a lot of these stories have been kind of banned by certain people in the wizarding world. A lot of the fairy tales in here seem like they could be, you know, commonplace fairy tales in our world. Yeah, so this one I would recommend. But yeah, that's the Hogwarts library for you. And yeah, I thought I would just mention that because I did also read these. But anyway, that's my thoughts. Another quick tidbit I wanted to add that's not really relevant to the review, but is just kind of interesting, is that this originally was a very limited publication. She only created like 7 copies of this book, and it was supposed to be some exclusive, rare book that she was only going to give to people that were involved in the series. And there was one that was given to, you know, sold at an auction to the public for an exorbitant amount of money. But then after the fans were clamoring to read it, they actually decided to publish it. So it has kind of a cool history. Another thing is all these books, the money also goes to a charity called Lumos. So you don't feel like you completely wasted your money because it's going to a charity that seems like it's a pretty good cause, although some of their goals seem a bit outlandish. It says at the end of here that by buying this book, you are helping Lumos ensure that, you know, orphanages are ended by 2050 and no child will have to live in an institution. I don't know if that's a realistic goal, if like every single child in an orphanage is going to have a home by 2050, and I don't know how Lumos is going to do that, but it seems like a noble goal, I guess. So yeah, that's my review of the Harry Potter franchise. Peace.